Welcome to the webinar. Please stand by. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. Mode.
Good evening and welcome to the virtual public meeting for the Route 28 Resurfacing and Road Diet Pilot Project. My name is Nate Lash and I'm just going to quickly introduce the project team before we get started. On the line we have Andy Paul, Kobe Lemmerise, and Andrew Wilkins from MassDOT's Highway Design Division. We have Paul Stedman from MassDOT District 4. Myself and Jeff Dietrich from Howard Stein Hudson. We're helping MassDOT with the public outreach for this project. And then we also have a number of town staff. So just want to thank them for being on the call tonight.
Very good. My name is Andy Paul. I'll be giving the presentation this evening. Nate, do you have any other remarks before I start?
I'll just let folks know that we will be doing a presentation this evening and then opening up for Q&A after the presentation. So if you have questions or comments, we just ask that you save those until we get through the presentation, and then hopefully we'll have a good amount of time for discussion.
Very good. Thank you very much, Nate, and thank you to the 39 or so attendees so far who have logged in. We've been looking forward to reaching out to the public through many means. One of them is virtually. So this is an important part of our project development process and the pilot itself. We'd also like to thank the town of Reading, both the elected officials who we presented to at the Board of Selectmen meeting last month, as well as the town staff who've been working with us throughout this process. They've helped coordinate getting this meeting scheduled and up and running. We'd also like to thank the legislative folks who've worked with us throughout development of this process, as well as the implementation. So this evening we're going to be talking about the Route 28. Oh, sorry, Nate, it said the recording stopped.
That's okay, Andy. I've got a backup going.
All right, cool. Thank you. So we'll be talking about the resurfacing and road diet pilot project on Route 28 in Reading. We have it scheduled for an hour and a half this evening, but we've got more time if there's lots of engagement for Q&A. The formal part of this presentation, though, will probably be between 25 and 30 minutes. Some of it will rehash what many of you may have already seen from the Board of Selectmen's meeting presented last month. So we'll get right into the presentation. To keep an accurate record and transcript of today's meeting, this video and audio chat transcript will be recorded by MassDOT. By continuing with this virtual meeting, you're considering your participation in the recorded event, and recordings and chat transcripts will be considered public information. If you do not feel comfortable being recorded, you may leave the meeting or turn off your camera or mute your microphone and just participate in basically as a listener only. Tonight we'll be covering the project background, so what led up to the pilot that's been in place since the spring. The public feedback that we've received to date has been very extensive, and so we'll go through some of that feedback and then revisions that we've made based off of the feedback that we've received. And then we'll go into the pilot schedule and our evaluation, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. So we'll first touch on project background. We've got the project team with us tonight, the folks in the design, construction, as well as our performance measures, doing evaluation. Howard Stein Hudson has been working with us on the public involvement side, and then, as I mentioned, the town staff and the town of Reading. So what's led up to this? This certainly isn't the first effort or the beginning of this project. This is really closer to the end of it. As you can see here, there was a road safety audit that was conducted about 7 years ago at the Route 28 and Franklin Street intersection. Those outcomes from the road safety audit were implemented within a year's time based off of the recommendations from the road safety audit. And then MassDOT also received correspondence from the state legislature regarding the roadway conditions, and a road diet evaluation was completed by Stantec on behalf of Mass DOT. In 2018, we engaged the town of Reading and elected officials to discuss a road diet on the northern section of Main Street, and the project was advertised, the one that's currently in construction, later in 2018. We had meetings with town staff in 2018, and the resurfacing project began. And then since the beginning of 2020, we've had weekly coordination meetings with the town staff. And it wasn't until the latter half of 2019 where it was determined that we would also pilot the southern section of Main Street. In 2020, obviously, the road diet and resurfacing work went into place. So the purpose and need of the project, obviously the condition of the roadway played a large factor in deciding whether or not to resurface the roadway. But then in digging through the data along this corridor, we compared the crash rate in this corridor on Main Street in Reading to the district, which is encompassing the Metro North area. And the average crash rate for that area was almost 1/3 of the crash rate that you see on Main Street. So there's a significant difference between the rate of crashes on this corridor compared to other corridors like it. The goals were to maintain a state of good repair along Route 28, improve safety for people using the corridor, in improving safety through calming traffic or reducing the speeds at which people are traveling around the Route 28 corridor. Improve accessibility for pedestrians. We have both state and federal standards that we have to meet as part of any project that we implement throughout the state. So from an accessibility perspective, implementing those goals, as well as meeting MassDOT's complete streets and healthy transportation policies. Again, something that we're doing across the state. To date, the roadway resurfacing has been underway. The modifications and improvements to sidewalks and crosswalks have also been underway, and the test of the road diet on Main Street is also underway, aim to improve safety and access along the corridor. For the road pilot design, we followed FHWA and MassDOT design standards. We conducted analysis of before and after conditions. So what were the traffic conditions at each of the signalized intersections along the corridor in the previous conditions that were there, and then after is the pilot implementation. And we compared the average delay at the intersections across the project area to test the feasibility of the new intersection configurations. And then we adjusted design based on feedback from the town of Reading staff, but also through correspondence that we received from many of the stakeholders and constituents within the town of Reading and using the Route 28 corridor. So we'll now touch on the road diets and center turn lanes. Many of you might be asking, what is a road diet? Really what a road diet is intended to do is eliminate one or more travel lanes along a corridor and repurpose the roadway space for other uses. It improves safety and mobility for all modes. Before the road diet, this is consistent with other corridors where we've worked on. You have 4 lanes on an undivided roadway, so no median in the center, and typically you have narrow shoulders. But during a road diet, and in this case you have a 3-lane cross section, the center turn lane is used for turning, and then just 1 lane in each direction, and then there's shoulders that then are provided along the corridor as well. The Federal Highway Administration, our federal partners, have studied road diets throughout the country and have found that road diets can have a crash reduction anywhere between 19 and 47%. This is a result of fewer travel lanes for drivers as well as pedestrians to cross, and allows for separated left turns at signalized intersections and more consistent flow. In this image here on the right, you're seeing a vehicle on the upper part of the image having to take a left-hand turn, and you can see what's often referred to as a double threat, where the vehicle one vehicle may yield to allow a vehicle to the green vehicle, the northbound traveling vehicle, to make the left turn, but they do not see and are actually shielded by the vehicle that stopped to let them go, the vehicle that's in the second lane traveling southbound. This conflict is eliminated with the center turn lane option, and this can be consistent at driveways as well as any intersecting roadways with the Route 28 corridor. It can also lead to safer accommodations for folks trying to cross the street at marked crosswalks. In this case, it's a double threat, but for a pedestrian, not necessarily for a driver, where the pedestrian walks out, the first vehicle closest to the curb yields to the pedestrian in the crosswalk, but the second vehicle in the left travel lane both does not see the pedestrian as well as the pedestrian not seeing the driver, and a crash can occur. So it reduces pedestrian crash risks along the corridor. It also has a traffic calming effect where with fewer travel lanes, there's less opportunity for speeding and eliminates passing. And at lower speeds, it reduces fatal and injury crashes. In this graphic here, you can see the percent likelihood of a pedestrian fatality and serious injury. And at 40 miles per hour, there's a 77% chance of pedestrian fatality or serious injury. That's reduced when speeds are reduced from 40 to 30 miles per hour to 50%. And then at 20 miles per hour, the likelihood of a fatality or serious injury to a pedestrian is only 18%. The cone of vision, which is on the bottom image of the slide, is when you are traveling at a faster speed, the driver, the operator of that vehicle has to look further down the roadway and further in advance. They have to scan ahead. And so that cone of vision is greater at slower speeds for scanning and observing pedestrians and as well as other users of the roadway, including vehicles along the corridor. We've done road diets both in Massachusetts, so we're not just relying on our federal partners for information about reduction in crashes. We piloted a road diet on Summer Street in Hingham, and we saw a decrease in speeds along the corridor by 5 miles per hour that had little to no impact on travel time or diversions, and is currently from that pilot is currently in the design and implementation phase. On Route 135 in Wellesley, there wasn't a pilot or a test there. They just advanced right to the implementation, and they saw 55% fewer crashes and 70% reduction in severe injury crashes. On Nonantum Road in Boston, Newton, and Watertown, there were also crash reductions, and severity of crashes went down on that corridor. Just last year on Day Boulevard in South Boston, we implemented a road diet in partnership with the City of Boston as well as the Department of Conservation and Recreation. This allowed for better access from the neighborhood to the adjacent recreational facilities along the waterfront there. What we found was very similar, where it reduced maximum speeds through the corridor significantly, and it did not impact travel times for folks driving along the corridor. In that case, we were able to really knit back together much of the neighborhood with the waterfront, which is a great resource for the folks that live and visit the South Boston waterfront. So center turn lanes, what do? They remove stopped or slowed left turning vehicles from through lanes. Previous to the implementation of the road diet pilot, if you were making a left turn on Route 28 in Reading, you were slowed or stopped in a through lane where folks were traveling at normal through volume speeds. So you see fewer rear end collisions with a center turn lane that reduce delays for through vehicles. It also provides drivers a space to wait for an adequate gap in traffic before making that turn. So there's a less of a rush for folks to make that turn. So you see fewer side swipe collisions where people might be changing lanes to get around turning vehicles. And then it creates spatial separation between opposing traffic, so fewer head-on collisions. Oftentimes when you were, I mentioned that double threat where one vehicle stops, it's blocking that that view of the driver of the oncoming vehicle in that second traveling lane. So this creates that separation to allow to see vehicles. Using center turn lanes, drivers may not travel in center turn lanes. They're really for turning only. That's why there are black and white signs that say center turn lane for turn use only. Never use the center left turn lane as an ordinary traffic lane or for passing vehicles. It should be only used when making a left turn or U-turn from the roadway where permitted and making a left turn from a side street or a driveway. So plan for your turn. When using the center turn lane, signal at least 100 feet before making your turn, or on a highway, signal at least 500 feet before your turn, and reduce your speed. Check your mirrors for traffic behind you and blind spots on your turn side. Watch out for oncoming vehicles, as they may be using the center turn lane as well to make left turns. Step 6 is when it's safe and the center turn lane is clear, enter the center turn lane to make your turn, and make sure no part of your vehicle is blocking the through traffic, and wait in the center turn lane until it's safe to make the left turn across oncoming traffic. So center turn lanes aren't used for parking. They're not used for passing. They're not used for a travel lane or a through lane. They're really just for turning purposes only. So we, to date, have received a lot of public input, really since we started this effort. We made a pretty big pivot early on in the project implementation when we had, like everyone, were impacted by COVID-19. So we had to recalibrate how we were going to engage the public. We, previous to this spring, had what we thought was a well laid out plan to engage folks in Reading at events that you all would be attending, and really had to switch gears to a virtual format. So we had a public meeting back in March, which some of you all may have attended and listened to online. That video still lives on the project webpage. We were able to get the website up and running pretty quickly, and have been receiving feedback from you all really since the website went live. We've also worked very closely with MassDOT on the public, with our MassDOT colleagues in our public relations office, as well as the folks at the town of Reading, using social media to push information out about any changes we were making to the corridor, as well as any upcoming events that we thought would be interesting to folks related to this road diet pilot. The video presentation that we gave had over 1,000 views on YouTube and was rebroadcast on RCTV. And then on the town of Reading side, they've also shared information on their website and done social media posts. And then there was a reverse 911 call that was sent out just prior to implementation of the road diet on the northern section that went to over 20,000 residents within the Reading reverse 911 system. So the feedback that we've gotten to date has mostly been through an online map that we have. We've received over 260 public comments, and most of the major themes are listed here. What are the anticipated traffic impacts and the impacts of COVID-19 on our evaluation? Access to businesses, important businesses along the corridor during an important time when businesses are being impacted, not just by construction, but also by the public health crisis that we're currently in. We've gotten a lot of feedback on intersection configuration, so very specific detail about turn lanes, or access to and from driveways adjacent to intersections, bike accommodations along the corridor. We've gotten feedback on less speeding on Main Street and questions about how to use the center turn lanes. In our collaboration with town staff, we gathered input from the public, and we've met with town staff weekly since the beginning of February. It's helped the projects team approach to a lot of the revisions that we've made. And then we presented project updates to the town of Reading Parking Traffic Transportation Task Force. And then we made an update to the Board of Selectmen's meeting on July 21st in 2020. So some of the revisions that we've made to the corridor early on in the design, we had heard questions about cross-sectional analysis, and so what we really wanted to test and develop in the pilot was traffic operations. And so there were questions about bike lanes and bike markings, and really what we wanted to do was focus on the outcomes of the lane changes themselves. And so we really just put in a striped 5-foot shoulder along the corridor. Here, so I'll go through some of the changes that we've made along the corridor in the original design. You can see here there are 2 travel lanes in the northbound direction and 2 travel lanes going from right to left on your screen, 1 lane going from left to right on your screen. What we found was that the far left end of the screen was a left-only lane that went into an important business on Route 28, just south of the railroad tracks, Bagel World. And that left-only lane was intended to just be the end of the 3-lane cross-section and transitioned just off the image to a 2-way left turn lane. So we worked very closely with town staff and other personnel to identify ways to alleviate the issues that we were observing in the field. And so we made these modifications to have a lane drop just after you cross over when you're heading southbound towards 128 and you go over the railroad tracks. The left lane ends and you transition into a single southbound lane, and the left only lane is designated only for the driveway or for folks accessing the driveways going in the southbound direction. We also made revisions to Main Street near Summer Avenue. In this case, some of the access to the businesses was impacted by the diagonal striping that you see there in between Doyon, and the Dynamic Sports. And so we eliminated the hatching area, the diagonal yellow striping in the center of the road, and went with a similar treatment that you saw in the previous slide where the lane taper markings were put in place, and then just a more standard double yellow center line was implemented along the approach to Summer Ave, heading in the northbound direction. Franklin Street, we just made some modifications there last week, where we modified the left-only lane heading from northbound, heading northbound onto Franklin Street, as well as just south of Franklin Street, extending the 2-way left turn lane closer to the intersection just south of there. And so those markings you can now see out in the field today. Those were made last week, and that was a result of feedback that we got from the public, communicated with town staff on some of the revisions that we were making, and then worked with our contractor in the field to make those adjustments. Other adjustments that were made at Federal Street, we implemented a short 2-way left turn lane, extending that 2-way left turn lane from just north of Federal Street to just south of Federal Street. And then a minor modification at Charles Street. There was a gore area similar to what you saw at Summer Ave in the median area that was eliminated and just replaced with a double yellow center line. And then just some minor modifications at Pearl Street to improve access into Rocky Road, but then also make it more clear where roadway users are supposed to be positioned as they access to and from the Pearl Street intersection. So just a quick sampling of some of the modifications that we've made, and you've probably seen those changes happening along the roadway as you've driven there. The pilot schedule and evaluation. So this is really the biggest change that we've made to the approach that we set out when we began this process a couple of years ago to determine whether or not to pilot the road diet and how to measure the outcomes of the pilot. So we installed the pavement markings in 2020 and made revisions and began the sidewalk and construction work. In the summer of 2020, we completed revisions, completed construction work along the corridor, and then you see on the bottom there, National Grid began emergency gas repairs and upgrades on South Main Street in the spring. They continued those throughout the summer. And then National Grid will complete roadway surface patches in South Main Street this fall. And that was something that was not in our project implementation plan. That was something that based off of the emergency repairs that had to go in place, we coordinated very closely with the town of Reading as well as utility partners to simultaneously do these two projects at the same time. And we'll complete upgrades to sidewalk and driveways on South Main Street this fall. Our revised schedule now extends the road diet pilot evaluation through to next spring. And we had previously planned on doing the pilot just through about this time, and then making a determination in the early fall about what to do. Based off of the feedback that we got from you all, and in close coordination with folks at the town of Reading, we decided to extend the pilot to do an analysis of the traffic conditions, not just based off of summer volumes, which are low, but also based off of the dramatic change in traffic volumes that we've observed, not just on Route 28 in Reading, but throughout the state. So we're planning to make a decision in the spring, and then announce final lane configuration, but that's, I think, going to be less of an announcement and more of a conversation with the public and with the town folks and other important stakeholders, and then do the final resurfacing the late spring or early summer, and then install those final pavement markings next year. So how are we doing our evaluation? And this is similar to evaluations that we've done for pilots and for other projects that we've implemented throughout the state. So we might sound obvious, but we've been driving the corridor. Staff at our district and construction levels have been driving the corridor. And then we've had folks in the highway design office and project management office also going out to the field to make observations. We've also received community feedback, and then we've got some data as well that I'll share with you this evening, or data analysis tools that we've been using and will continue to use over the winter and into next spring. Some of those main measures of effectiveness that we're going to use are vehicle speeds. So I mentioned earlier in the slide presentation about the severity of crashes and how it relates to speed, and so that's an important measure, as well as travel times. We want to make sure that we're not creating a bottleneck in what is the main street, but also the most heavily used street in the town of Reading, that would then push traffic to the side streets. So it's not our goal to flood the side streets just to make one street safer, but then create these higher risk areas throughout the town. And then what are the impacts on traffic volumes as well? And then driver and pedestrian experiences along the corridor. We, early on in the process, decided to use some of our highway operations center, which is located in South Boston. But we decided to use some of their intelligent transportation systems to create situational awareness about these modifications that we were making in the field. And so we've used those cameras to share information with stakeholders about modifications that we've made in the field. So this video here shows just a quick clip of some of the video feeds that we're getting from the very areas where we're making changes along the corridor. We also have a system called RIDIS. It's a Regional Integrated Transportation Information System. A bit of a mouthful, but what that is it measures speed and travel time along major corridor, so any state highways throughout the state, and it identifies what those averages are. And so over a 24-hour period, we can go in on almost a real-time basis and pull information based off of the use of the corridor. What's best about this tool, though, is it also has archived information from 2019, 2018, and 2017, where we can go back and compare, say, September to September, August to August. And so we're not just looking at travel speeds and speeds and travel times in your corridor during the pilot. We can look at previous years as well. We have another tool called Streetlight, which doesn't just look at major corridors, it also looks at side streets. And so this tool really takes a deeper dive into not just speed and travel time, but also volume. And through the analytics that this system runs, this is a screenshot of the tool looking at the town of Reading, where we have 100% coverage of all of the streets in Reading, and can compare as well historical information. So we can look at travel speeds, both northbound and southbound along the corridor, as well as volume information to identify where we're seeing any changes in volume compared to previous years. So with these two tools, Redis and Streetlight, we're going to compare throughout the pilot process and leading into the winter and early spring what those deltas are that we're seeing. This all relates back to our MassDOT mobility dashboard, where we're not just tracking these things in the town of Reading, we're responsible for tracking these statewide. And so this tool here, which is available on mass.gov, looks at certain count stations throughout the state. And you can see here the different colors on the map indicating a percent change between 2020 and 2019 when comparing similar weeks. And so we have this dashboard that's updated weekly, and you can see here the ones in the darkest red still have the highest delta between volumes observed currently in 2020 compared to 2019. And so that that greatest delta is in the downtown Boston area and the tunnel system itself. And then you can see the lighter oranges and yellows are closer to less than 20% difference in change in volume throughout the system. So this is just one tool that we're not using necessarily on Reading, but we're using that same approach to identify what the change in volume is on 28 compared to previous years, so that we can do an analysis based off of that. So our next steps are to continue our public outreach and provide educational resources both through our website and the town's website, respond to questions and comments that we get in from the public, and then continue to gather public input by monitoring email address as well as the online comment forum. And we'll continue to collect and analyze data and continue to meet weekly and coordinating with the town staff. So that ends the presentation portion and begins the question and answer portion of our presentation. Nate, I will turn it over to you for maybe giving some folks some information about how to ask questions.
Sure. Thank you, Andy. So at the bottom of that slide, you can see some contact information. If you'd like to learn more, to visit our project website, as well as contact information to send us an email or leave us a voicemail. Andy, if you could go to the next slide. I'm just going to share some logistics about how the Q&A session is going to work. We understand that things are very different in a virtual environment, so we'll try and do our best here. So for folks who would like to speak, there is a raise hand button. You can see that in the green circle there on your menu. We're going to be alternating between folks who have raised their hands and folks who submit comments through the chat, the questions box. And if you go to the next slide, so that green circle is now highlighting, let's see. Can you do one more slide, Andy? There we go. So there's also a way for folks to submit questions through the questions box if you'd prefer to write them in. If you did raise your hand and we do call on you, your microphone needs to be unmuted on your end as well as on our end. So we'll unmute and we'll just make sure that your microphone is also unmuted. And then just one more slide, Andy. Some tips. There's a lot of folks on right now. We have 52 folks on in the meeting, so thank you so much for attending. We are going to try our best to get through, all the questions and comments that folks have. So we'll be alternating between people with raised hands and folks who have submitted written questions. We're going to ask that folks limit it to 2 minutes. We want to hear from as many folks as possible because we know this project impacts so many residents and folks in Reading. So we will be asking folks to keep their remarks to 2 minutes. And if you have technical difficulties or you don't get to say everything you want to say tonight, our contact information is on the right. And as Andy mentioned, we'll be continuing to gather input through the winter, through the fall. So there will be additional opportunities for folks to share feedback. Before we get into the Q&A, just want to acknowledge and thank State Senator Jason Lewis for attending tonight. And we'll just ask if you have any remarks or questions, Senator, we'd be happy to take them.
And Nate, I'll just give a quick plug for if there's, we have the 2 minute shot clock, if you will, for asking questions. It's just to be able to give folks the opportunity to comment. Certainly, if we get through the first round and people have more questions or have more time, we'll certainly be able to address those. I'm willing also to go over time if there needs to be more time. I don't want to consider 7:30 a hard stop by any means. But there is a presidential debate this evening, so I know people probably don't care what I have to say at a certain point and might just log off. So we'll also, Nate had mentioned, certainly this is not the end or our final opportunity for you to give us feedback, both through the website, our email addresses, and certainly we'll coordinate offline if folks need, it's very specific questions. We worked with a couple of abutters on things where it was more of a conversation rather than an email back and forth that made us get to a resolution. So certainly happy to work with folks as well in that format.
Great, thanks, Andy. So we'll just open it up again to State Senator Lewis. If you have any comments, you should be unmuted. Alrighty, hearing none. Unfortunately, State Rep Haggerty and State Rep Jones were not able to attend tonight, and they send their regrets. But we do want to acknowledge them and thank them for their continued engagement. And I think Michelle Cilo is on the line. Do you have any comments or questions from the State Rep's office? Michelle, it looks like you're self-muted, so if you have anything to say.
Hi, this is Senator Jason Lewis. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. All right. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but well, good evening, everyone. Just I'll be very brief, but this project, the Route 28 project, has been a long time priority for the town of Reading, the residents of the town, and also the state legislative delegation. So I did want to also thank my colleagues, Representative Brad Jones, former Representative Jim Dwyer and current Representative Rich Haggerty. We've all worked on this project for many years. The presentation tonight I thought was excellent, great update, and I'm certainly very pleased, with the progress that we've made. I want to thank the MassDOT team and the Reading Town staff for all of your very hard work on this project and the excellent collaboration that we've seen between MassDOT and the town and the public. I'm certainly pleased that Road Diet pilot is part of the project. I'm personally a big fan of road diets for all the reasons that Andy presented in his presentation. That said, I recognize that there are different perspectives on road diets. And again, that's why this is being done as a pilot, so that we're able to gather all of that data and feedback and then make a final decision together next year. So I look forward to lots of continued public engagement and feedback and good collaboration on this project, so we can get the best possible outcome at the end of the day. And thanks for the opportunity to say a few words this evening.
Thank you, Senator Lewis, for your support, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Great. And we also just want to, thank and acknowledge the Town of Reading Select Board. We were able to present wood to them earlier this summer, and I know that Vanessa Alvarado is on the line, so just thank you for being here. Ms. Alvarado, it looks like that your audio is not connected, so if you would like to say anything, please, send us a message in the questions pane, and we can get you on the line. With that, we will open it up to Q&A, starting with the first question that we got written, and then moving over to the first person who would like to speak and ask the question. So we'll start with a written question from Jeffrey Everson. And that question is, can you show by statistical significance that the diet configuration is safer than the previous highway configuration?
Sure. So, Mr. Everson, some of the information that was presented in tonight's meeting is just that. So the statistics from the Federal Highway Administration, that 19 to 47% reduction in crashes along corridors, as well as the more local implementations of road diet, have all shown to both reduce overall crashes along the corridor, but also reduce the severity of those crashes. That was what the biggest change between before and after that we saw. You saw in Wellesley and Newton, as well as many other projects where it's reducing crashes, but it's also reducing the worst type of crashes, the fatality or severe injury crashes. What we won't be able to show is a comparison in crashes during a pilot. So oftentimes when you do a safety study, it's not just based off of 1 year's worth of data. It's based off of many years of data. You can have variations in crashes, the number of crashes that are occurring year to year. So in a pilot of this nature, where we had originally intended it to be for a handful of months, this will extend to be almost a year, maybe 8 or 9 months. So I wouldn't, as an engineer, present to you that outcome as a definitive measure of success or failure of the pilot, one way or the other. We wouldn't want to say just based off of the crashes that are occurring. There are certain instances where if there are patterns of crashes, we can identify changes that should be made, like the changes that you saw tonight. But really what we're going to base our decision off, which was shown in the presentation, was speed and the traffic volume data and the travel time data, and really using that speed as a proxy for whether or not this is a success. and we showed there is a very linear relationship between speed and severity. It was shown in one of the slides as, actually, Nate, I think I can still have control of the slides. If I can dare to try to jump around here. I'm not a TV producer. The biggest statistical difference when you're looking at crashes as it relates to speed is shown here, where this specific information is related to pedestrian fatality and serious injuries at different speeds, and where it's very much a sliding scale, where at higher speeds there's higher severity, whereas at lower speeds, lower severity. And so what we've seen in other locations is a reduction in speed based off of a road diet. And what we were trying to balance here was also the operational impacts that we knew we wanted to see in real time along the corridor. So I think that answered the question, Nate. If you want to go on to the next one.
Sure thing. So next we'll go to Karen Dolan, who asked to speak. So Karen, we've unmuted your mic.
And Karen, just before you get going, I just want to say for everyone, so Jeff, I'm sort of serving as timekeeper tonight for at least folks' first questions. So like Nate mentioned, we're trying to limit to 2 minutes so we can make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak. So I'll be keeping time. You don't have to worry about it. About 1.5 minutes in, you can look up and you'll see this on your screen, that yellow screen. And then if you get towards 2 minutes, I'll put in this, I hope, cute reminder that that's about 2 minutes. And just a sort of a friendly reminder as we get going to make sure everybody can get their moment as well. Sorry to cut you off, Karen.
So we actually live off of Pearl Street, which is on a hill, which meets Route 28. We've had an ongoing water issue where water comes off Route 28 for many years now. And I've been in contact with the Mass DOT engineers prior to this project starting. Some alterations have been made. However, the water continues to flow down from Route 28 onto Pearl Street. I'd like to know if any alterations, if any, are in the plans to continue to mitigate this ongoing water issue. I've unfortunately not heard anything further from the engineers.
Sure. So as part of state of good repair projects like this one, we're typically working within the curb to curb width of the roadway, and then making some minor modifications to like ramps for pedestrian access and other things. With drainage, we usually are going in and cleaning out catch basins and replacing kind of a one-to-one in-kind replacement. But Paul, I don't know if you want to chime in anything about other mitigation strategies that we've used on State Highway in District 4.
Yeah, and just to the point, as Andy said, the the goal of the resurfacing project is kind of curb to curb and update the facilities as to bring them into a state of good repair. Obviously, though, if we are aware of particular issues, we want to encounter them and try and address them to the maximum extent that we can in the design. So I apologize, Karen, if you had reached out to someone on our staff and they have not gotten back to you. If you could either provide your address or a contact number, I'd be happy to have some follow-up directly with you to get to the bottom of exactly what the issue is and see if it's something that could be addressed and is appropriate to address as part of this project, or if there's other opportunities to try and make some headway with it.
And Karen, of course, please feel free to email that to the email or send it as a voice message if you don't want to broadcast it on our CTV.
Sure. I will do that in the morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for the comment. Want to go to the next one?
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, so the next written comment we have is submitted by Robert Atkinson. That is, what about traffic impacts in the transitions in North Reading and Stoneham?
Okay. The transitions in North Reading and Stoneham. So those are the northern limit and the southern limit of the project. At the northern limit, we were quite fortunate at that intersection that, as it existed previously, had left turn only lanes in each direction. And so what we did is in those left turn lanes, we're just aligned with a through lane on the opposing side of the intersection. So if you're traveling into Reading from North Reading, and you were in the left lane along the 4-lane corridor, that left lane ended and became a left only lane. So we maintained that same approach as part of this project. So the transition there, both to and from North Reading, was consistent with what was previously there. On the southern end, actually, I could go back to the Summer Ave slide here, where we did make some modifications. You can see here on the revised image that's on the bottom half of the slide, to the right is Reading Center. To the left is you're approaching 95 and the Stoneham line. So as you're coming from the town Reading Center, and going towards Stoneham, after you go through the Summer Ave intersection, you open up to 2 lanes. Conversely, when you're coming from Stoneham towards downtown Reading, there's a left lane drop that happens just in advance of that Summer Ave intersection, and you're transitioned from a 2-lane northbound approach down to just 1 lane, and then we open up to that left turn only lane that you see there to go on to Summer Ave. And then north of there, the road diet is in place with just 1 lane in each direction in the center turn lane. So those are the 2 transitions.
Great. So moving back into the voice questions, you're just going to kind of hear from me and then Nate as we go here. I've been keeping a tally of in which order folks raised their hands, just to sort of keep some order to the voice questions. So each time you hear me, you're going to hear the person who I'm about to unmute, and then also I'll give the next person down the list the heads up so you can prep for your question in a moment. So the first hand that we had raised during the presentation was from Virginia Adams. So Virginia, I've unmuted you. We should be able to hear you now. And of course, if you don't have a question anymore, if it was answered, don't worry about it. You can just say that and we can move on. All right, Virginia, sorry, I saw you put down your hand, so I assume that you are all set. So we'll just go to the next voice question, which is from Deb Vogelin, and then Maureen, you'll be next after our next text question. So Deb, if you are self-muted at the moment, but you should be good now.
Okay, my husband, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my husband is a member of the police department. So I have one basic question, and then he has some issues that he's seen. So I'd like to know how they're addressed. So the first question is, how are the police expected to make safe traffic stops when the traffic returns to pre-pandemic levels, and therefore the traffic stops are expected to return to pre-pandemic levels, given that now they would have to stop them in the traffic lane? The other things that he's seen is there's too many areas that don't have left turn lanes, causing traffic to stop completely in that 1 lane of traffic. Truck deliveries are also stopping in the travel lane, blocking the traffic. The police and fire often have to go into that passing lane and travel on the wrong side of the road or in that suicide lane. On an emergency call, theoretically going at a higher rate of speed than the traffic would be. Bicyclists have not been using the bike lane, because there's a lot of debris in that lane. So is there going to be some way to do that? And he has seen actually more accidents due to the quick lane reductions.
Okay.
So how do you anticipate dealing with these issues, that are out there now and will probably be increasing?
Sure. So I'll go through, maybe keep her on the line, Jeff, just so I make sure I answer all the questions, but I jotted them down quickly.
Yes, of course.
I'll jump up to the cross section. So one of the changes that we there's a different one. Well, I'll use this slide for now. So you see on the right, the revised design includes the shoulders. Actually, that's not a good. Hold on, let me go to a different slide. All right, here. So in the previous condition where there were 2 lanes in each direction, if there was a traffic stop, the officer making the stop would just pull the vehicle over in a travel lane. So like right in the middle of the lane, there was only 1 foot shoulders or no shoulders in most cases throughout the corridor. So what happens now is a vehicle on the right side of the image here is able to pull over into a 5 foot shoulder, which is not wide enough for a vehicle, but vehicles passing that pulled over vehicle and the police officer's vehicle who's parked in that same shoulder there can then get around the vehicle using the remaining lane width. So vehicles about 7 feet wide, maybe takes up about 8 feet if they're not pulled right up snug to the curb. There's a 5 foot shoulder there. So they're 3 feet, they're hanging over 3 feet into the lane, which is 11 feet wide. So there's 8 feet left over. So technically 2 vehicles could pass in that same space. Fortunately, we do have the center turn lane here where it's not like you are just then having to go into oncoming traffic. You can use that center turn lane or a small portion of it to pass a vehicle that's pulled over. The same could be said for delivery trucks. They now don't have to stop in a lane. They can pull over into a shoulder and vehicles can use the remaining balance of the lane, the travel lane, as well as the center turn lane that's there. There is debris on not just Route 28, but many highways throughout the Commonwealth. We do have sweeping that occurs and other maintenance activities that occur on state highways. The intent, though, was to just analyze this as a shoulder and not analyze it based off of a proper bike facility. We realize that this is a higher speed, higher volume roadway than what most folks would feel comfortable riding a bike on. So there are other strategies that we can use, but certainly maintenance is an important part of that. And then regarding the number of crashes as well, there are changes that we are making that we just concluded last week. I don't think there'll be any changes that we plan on making, at least not in the near future. We want to observe the operations based off of how those changes have impacted things. And we have appreciated the input both from police and fire at the town level, as well as other town staff. They're invited to and have participated, maybe not in every single weekly meeting, but most of them since last February. And, I think one of the things that just personally at the beginning of this process, a lot of the calls that were coming in related to this road diet were going to the 911 dispatch. And I thought that was doing a disservice to what our frontline workers were supposed to be doing, which was addressing a global pandemic. And so we really ramped up our efforts to make sure that those calls and that feedback was directed to our website. And so thank you for the work that your husband's doing. And I think we want to continue to work with both the police and fire chief to make sure that we've got a true understanding of what the issues are out there that are occurring.
Am I still muted or no? What
Nope.
about the police and fire and the issues of, traveling down a 1-lane road on an emergency call?
So they can, in the same, people should be pulling over to the side, and in the same way, you would pull over if you're doing enforcement. Vehicles should be pulling over into that 5 foot shoulder. And so there's a balance then of space that's available in the travel lane, but then also they can use that center turn lane space to pass vehicles that are pulled over along the corridor.
Okay, I think he'll probably be sending some emails, I think, because he's
Sure.
finding most of this not to really be fact. I mean, he's seen trucks stopped in the left turn lane and then running across the travel lane to make the delivery.
Yep, and that is
They're in the middle of the road, so.
that the center turn lane is not intended for parking. It's illegal to park on state highway, and so
Yep.
yeah, no, if that's what's happening, we want to know about it, and we want to work with our partners on emergency response to make sure that is not the case.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Deb.
Alrighty, so moving to our next text question from Nora Bucko. The question is, at some points the center lane is going up some hills. How to prevent collisions from maybe vehicles that are both trying to use the center turn lane at the crest of the hill?
That's a great question, Nora. And so one of the slides that we put together was how to use the center turn lane, signaling in advance of getting into the turn lane, and then only when you're closer to your actual turn do you actually use the center turn lane. So it shouldn't be used for traveling. Let's see if I can remember which one that one is. And yeah, so signaling your turn, reducing your speed, and then when it's safe to enter that center turn lane, only then should you be in the center turn lane to make your turn. And so at the crest of a curve, the crest of a hill, you identified it as a challenge where there are two vehicles opposing one another, both trying to make turn lanes, and maybe 1,000 feet or 800 feet from one another, they can't see each other until you're closer on top of them. What we're trying to do through this public outreach platform, as well as others, is educate folks on utilizing that turn lane only when you're at or near where you're actually going to be making your turn. There is one specific location where we've actually gone out and done
right near Bagel World. That was an email I had sent because there is no center lane turn going southbound on Main Street to take a left onto Avon Street. Is that to say that's intentional, that we should be taking a turn from the travel lane? My next question is about the streetlight program app. Did I understand that right? Is there any prior information about the abutting side streets, travel on the abutting side streets, or is it only going forward, the data?
Yep.
And then finally, I guess I have three questions. What is the goal speed? That one of your slides referenced the accident and victim impact about at 20 miles per hour, 30 miles per hour, 40. What is the goal of miles per hour speed in these areas? Thank you.
Sure. Maybe I'll answer the streetlight data first because that's the shortest. We do have data. We do have historical data from streetlight. So it looks back to 2019 and 2018, and in some areas of the state, we even have data going back to previous years beyond that. So we're anticipating looking at a 3-year period as well, so we can compare those. On the Bagel World, the outcome or intention of our revision didn't really change how we really anticipated people would use the corridor. It just helped reinforce it. So this slide here shows both the modifications, and I'll step through how we intended people to use it. So when you're coming out of downtown Reading, heading towards the Bagel World, you go over the railroad tracks. We had intended for people, we had put up signs really from the very beginning that said left lane, must turn left. And so we naively thought like that would force people to go over into the right lane. What we did was reinforce the signs that were installed with pavement markings. So we put in that diagonal skip line that you see here, as well as those left diagonal arrows. So as you're coming out of the downtown, if you're in the left lane, you see the left lane must turn left, and those diagonal arrows as well as diagonal lines that indicate you should transition into the right lane for through traffic. And really at anywhere in that corridor, you're allowed to take a left whether it's just previous to where the lane drop occurs or anywhere in there where there's also the diagonal skip lines. You can make a left from anywhere in that area. And it's not until you get to the Bagel World site where that left turn only lane ends. And then with speed reduction, you saw a couple of different outcomes from some analysis that we did. I think the speeding, like the highest speeds, is what we saw a reduction in the South Boston example on Day Boulevard, where we had people going in excess of 70 miles an hour on a 4-lane neighborhood street. And so we were able to knock that maximum speed down to 50 something miles per hour. So we saw that as a success. But certainly we don't think we're going to change the average speed by that much. So reducing your maximum speed by as much as practical, and then reducing the average speeds, what we saw in most cases was about anywhere between 2 and 5 mile an hour change. So if you're bringing down your average speed, say people on average are going 40 miles per hour and instead they're going 35 miles per hour, that changes kind of the overall body of traveling vehicles on the corridor, but then it also eliminates some of those top end speeds. So a crash could occur on this corridor at 50 or 55 miles an hour. It's a pretty straight corridor. If that person is in a 3-lane cross section and in a single lane instead of 2 lanes, they don't have the ability to pass. So we want to bring down the overall average, but really eliminate some of those maximum speeds that we see on the corridor. And I think that answered all the questions that you asked.
Yeah, Maureen, if you have another question, please just feel free to shoot us a text message and we'll get to you. But I see more than a dozen, maybe 15 text questions and a couple hands left. So thank you.
Okay.
So the next question that was written is again from Robert Atkinson, and the question is, why wasn't the select board in North Reading consulted and engaged in the process?
That is a good question. The project limits are only included in the within the proper limits of the town of Reading. We did engage the state legislature, as we mentioned earlier, and the representative, whose name escapes me, I apologize, who was working with us very closely on the modifications that we made at Franklin Street, also represents North Reading, and not to say that he represents the entirety of North Reading, but for the most part, we're working with just the municipality, unless there's some real permitting reason or limits are modified that will impact others. Certainly, though, that's not to ignore that there are regional impacts based off of any changes that we make to our state highway system. And so that's where MassDOT certainly isn't speaking on behalf of everyone within the region, but Paul Stedman, who's on the call, represents, he's the highway director for the entire district, and has all towns are equal within your district, Paul, but the corridor of I-93 and 128 are important corridors from a regional perspective, and so we wanted to make sure if we were making these lane reductions that they weren't also going to have an inverse impact on I-93. But Paul, I don't know if you want to add anything about North Reading.
I just will say, Andy, that just very recently, North Reading has actually approached the district about talking about the section of Route 28 within that community and their desire to consider a complete streets approach to that. So while they may not have had direct involvement or consultation on this particular road diet pilot, a seat at the table, if you will, it seems like they are either, seeing some of the changes that have had out there and trying to see if they might be something that might be applicable to their community. So we're very interested in following up with North Reading to see where that process may lead.
Sure, and maybe I was misreading the question too, because there's the project limits were defined kind of on cyclical resurfacing schedules, and so those were previously determined based off of historical conditions of the roadway. And so like all state highways, usually every 10 to 15 years, we're back at it again to do some type of maintenance effort to improve or maintain a state of good repair along the corridor. So next question.
Great. So our next hand is from Bernard Horn. So Bernard, I'll unmute you in just a moment. You're also self-muted. And I just wanted to acknowledge that we know we got a written letter from you as well today. And then after Bernard, our next voices, we have surprisingly two Jeffs as well as myself on the call. So Jeff Everson will be next, followed by Jeff Lopatka.
And
the text questions as well.
Just to mention, we received the email today from Mr. Horn, but he also sent a letter in July, which we wanted to acknowledge as well.
Yeah.
But
Bernard, you're green on my board.
Thank you. Yeah, certainly appreciate the presentation, and I certainly appreciate the data that is given. And as you point out, I did submit a letter on July 20th. I haven't received any answers to those questions. I did get a document about an hour ago, maybe it's 2 hours ago now. So appreciate that. But generally speaking, I'm opposed to the traffic diet. The 12 questions that I asked today and the July 20th questions are, basically trying to point out that much of the data that are being used sort of misrepresent and kind of falsely provide a solution for which A, there may not really be a problem, and B, there's there's a lot of consequences to side road traffic and so forth that I think is being misrepresented. So I don't know if you could answer my questions without me having to repeat them all, but I think the primary question is that the objective of the road should be to maximize the flow subject to safety requirements, that speed is strictly a function of volume, that the greater the volume, the lower the speed. So trying to use speed as a metric is kind of a non-event when you're talking about heavy traffic, notwithstanding, the observations that you've made. I guess we could probably ask for the DOT to summarize the responses and how many have been for and against. So maybe you could do that. The other questions are the traffic diversions. There's no question that's going to happen. I guess the other point is that the flow data, having 2 lanes instead of 4 lanes, there's no sensible way that a conclusion could be drawn that that would carry the same volume of traffic. So yeah, I don't want to repeat all my questions, but perhaps you could respond to the 12 questions from today and the questions. I know that some of those questions were referred to a Freedom of Information Act in July, but some of those are easily answered. So I guess maybe, back to you on, obviously we could try to, I think that, we have to have a better form of meeting. This doesn't seem to work helpful, but anyway, maybe I could just stop there.
Sure. And Mr. Horn, I want to acknowledge our shortfalls in being responsive. I want to get you and everyone who's asked questions of us those answers as soon as possible. And I think whether it's information that's on our website or other formats, I'm hoping that we are providing information to the public. So I'll answer some of the questions that you noted now, but I think also perhaps just scheduling a time with you in the near future to follow up, and seems like more of a dialogue than just giving you responses might not be as helpful as more a conversation might be helpful. So
I would definitely agree with that, but I've asked repeatedly through a lot of emails, phone calls for exactly what you're proposing, but nobody seems to want to engage. And I think that that's one of the problems. This is the kind of project where it's forced down on people without any ability to really challenge, the kind of issues that you're trying to impose on people. And even though I've tried, there's been no there's been no engagement on the part of the DOT, and I think that's an issue that we have to deal with.
And we plan on dealing with that, absolutely. I think the flow rates are an important part of our analysis. We want to base our the decision that's being made on data that we're observing in the field. So feedback that we're getting from you, information or that we're getting from our partners at the local level and the town of Reading staff, as well as observations that we're making in the field. I need to repeat it that we don't want to just choke the traffic on Main Street and force that traffic to two side streets. There's a lot of reasons why we don't want to do that, but I think with the tools that we've laid out here tonight, we're planning to continue to collect data off of what are those impacts on not just Main Street itself, but Haverhill Street, Franklin Street, Grove Street, Pearl Street, like all of the parallel corridors to Route 28, and then the perpendicular roadways that connect to and from Main Street to those parallel corridors. And it's only through that comprehensive review that I think we can present information to the public and then cooperatively come to a decision on what the outcomes are for the pilot. Certainly, speed and volume are going to be an important part of that. But I think, there was a question about the transition to and from North Reading, where at that intersection that's furthest north in the town of Reading, within town of Reading's limits, where there is a left turn lane that's introduced. That was there before we ever did this pilot, and that will be there with the pilot. And so there is kind of a limiting factor that limits the flow rate into the town of Reading itself from North Reading into this corridor. And then on the southern end of the project limits, where there were certainly more challenges, you're limited by the capacity at the intersection just north of the railroad tracks. So there's other limiting factors other than just the number of lanes that you have in a corridor that dictate how many vehicles can get through it. And then what we're trying to do is manage the space in between those intersections. And so there are some sections of the corridor where you saw we implemented 2 lanes as opposed to just 1 lane in each direction, or we formalized the left turn only lane. We didn't just take what the federal highway prescription was and lay out, a very symmetric corridor with 1 lane and a center turn lane. There's a lot of thought that went into this, and the analysis that we presented is all on our website as well. But certainly look forward to the discussion. And then as far as for and against, Nate, do we have any information about there is some positive feedback. Most of the time we just get negative feedback. There is some positive feedback that we're hearing from folks about a reduction in the speed and their ability to use that center turn lane to access their driveways or businesses along the corridor.
Yeah, I can speak to that. And one of the nice things about the interactive map that we've gotten over, I think, 150 comments from is that folks can attach their comments to a specific location along the project area. And so a lot of the comments we have been getting are specific to a location. A lot of those have been related to the different intersections or revisions that have been made. So early on, we definitely got a lot of folks talking about Minot Street and Bagel World. And then after that, sort of moved up to Charles Street, and certainly the Forest Street, Forest Glen road intersection, where we recently made revisions and added a northbound left turn lane. There have also been, a lot of concern about what will happen with traffic volumes and traffic and congestion along Main Street once volumes return to sort of the pre-pandemic levels, if they do, and how we will be able to evaluate the effectiveness of the road diet based on the varying traffic volumes. And so I think the majority of the negative comments have been more about what will happen once traffic returns to normal. But we have also, heard from some folks that, echoing some of the concerns that we've heard tonight, as well as folks saying they appreciated the shoulders. It's a lot easier to bike on Main Street now. People are saying there's more people, walking about, and it feels safer as a pedestrian to cross Main Street, which is a bustling, busy road sometimes. So we haven't done any sort of thumbs up, thumbs down analysis because so many of the comments are contextual and specific to locations. But that's something we'll definitely be doing over the spring, is sort of taking a holistic look at all the comments we've received, especially after the comments we received after it was implemented.
I'm just going to step in my role as timekeeper again. And Bernard, I know we've been in conversation, so we'll arrange a follow-up time to talk as well. But I know we have at least 12 more text questions and a few more hands, and it's closing in on 7:25. So I just wanted to thank you, Andy.
Yep.
Great. So we've gotten two very similar text questions that I'll read together. One is about the quality of paving on Route 28 South, particular between Summer Ave and Calruso's. Another sort of similar question is, the South Main Street corridor has been dug up and repairs done after it was paved nicely. It's again a mess. Why was construction done after the paving, and will it be repaved again?
Sure, and just real quick, I mentioned, without at risk of repeating, we were coordinating with the town of Reading and other utility companies as part of the project development process. The national work that started this spring and is still ongoing those were emergency repairs that had to happen to the gas line under Route 28 along that corridor. There were leaks within that system that are now being repaired. And so in order to address those, we had to have two concurrent construction activities along that section of the corridor, which is less than ideal. What we're getting out of this, though, is a final course of paving that will go down once a decision is determined as to whether or not the pilot will remain in place, that will be installed next spring or early summer. So based off the project schedule, we identified the May-June timeframe where things would be a final course of asphalt, which is about another inch or two of asphalt, will go on over what's in place today. Paul, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I agree that the conditions out there related to the gas line trench work are a little bit less than desirable, but that's also to be expected. It's a temporary. Right now, what you're seeing out there is a temporary trench patch, and that's done as they move along with the work. Now that they've completed their gas line infrastructure installation, what they will now be doing in the coming weeks, certainly before the end of this fall, is to come back and remove that 7 or 8 inches of pavement within that trench, that temporary pavement, and do a permanent trench repair. So at the end of the day, which will be sometime hopefully in mid to late October, the pavement conditions should be essentially back to where they were when our contractor installed the first layer of pavement on that section last year. A smooth section of pavement without a lot of bumps or ruts or things like that. So that work from the gas company is still to come, and as Andy mentioned, we still have the final layer of new pavement that'll be installed next spring.
Great. So Jeffrey Everson is our next hand raised. And then, as I mentioned, Jeffrey Lepatka will follow. And Mr. Lepatka, if you're listening, we had to send you an audio pin. So if you can enter that, you'll be able to be unmuted when your turn is up after Jeffrey Everson. But Jeffrey, you are clear to speak. As I mentioned, I mean, if you're talking and we can't hear you, I apologize. But you can send a message in the chat if you want to try and troubleshoot with me, or if your question is all set, you can say that as well. But I'll give you one more second if you are still muted somehow on your end, and then we'll go back to a text question or try Mr. Lopatka as well. Nate, why don't we do a couple of text questions for now, and then I'll try and troubleshoot with both of these gentlemen here, see if we can get either of them.
Sounds good. I did see Mr. Lopatka have a mic icon did show up, so I think we'll be able to get to him next. But moving to the next text question, does every single left turn available have an arrow corresponding to it? For example, does every house or every driveway?
Good question. No, there's a more typical pattern that's used. And so I'll just go to that graphic quickly. Along the corridor, so these are some of the modifications you can see here that were put into place. So I'll skip through those though. Sorry, just a quick second here. Okay, so this image here is actually good. The left arrows are just supposed to be a typical indication where you can see they're spread out every 500 feet or so along the corridor, and they're paired up, one left arrow for each direction. So in this case, they're just typically spread out throughout the corridor, not supposed to indicate actual locations where the turns are supposed to be. And those are paired up with signs along the corridor as well, which say center turn lane for left only. So that answers that question, I believe, Nate.
Yeah, so we'll go back to voice and see if we can get Jeffrey Lopatka on the phone. And if I've been mispronouncing your name, sorry, so please apologize. So I've unmuted you. I see that you're self-muted. So if you can unmute yourself, you should be able to go by voice. Yes, looks good.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for spending the time, folks, and for the good presentation. So I'll just make a comment and then kind of ask a question, and then kind of go on mute again and let you guys respond. I'm kind of in the mold of the gentleman who I think wrote the letter and has been doing follow-up where something doesn't kind of pass the logic test here, where we're hearing that we can reduce the number of lanes, and slow speeds, but get people through the town or get the same kind of throughput through town. So I'm a little concerned when things kind of resume post-COVID, and traffic patterns kind of get back to normal, that logic will prevail, and that just won't be possible. And if decisions are made prior to that, we'll be in a kind of a rough spot where we are pushing traffic out to the subsidiary, other routes that don't have traffic now, and push it through neighborhoods and stuff. So that's a global kind of statement that I guess I'd put out there. And my personal experience has been during this pilot, I've been one time I was being passed on the left when I was trying to turn into the Fairchild neighborhood. So if I hadn't done a last minute shoulder check moving into that center lane, there was someone literally right next to me that was trying to get by me at the same moment. And then I've been passed going southbound in the center lane by someone who experienced road rage and wanted to get through town quick, and was flipping me off while they were doing it. So that's my kind of brief experience, where prior to that, when it was kind of 2 lanes each direction, there were certainly things that happened, right? But that's a pretty concentrated time in low volume to have a couple of episodes like that, that were both kind of done in that middle passing lane. So I'll just provide that as some personal experience, and maybe throw that out for comment. Along with your presentation had really a lot of positives, which again, it would be great if it all proves out to be true. I'm wondering if your data showed any negatives that maybe weren't presented or that that you saw but maybe didn't come out clearly in the deck today. So I'll mute myself.
Sure. I think Jeff, the biggest negatives were a lot of the revisions that I mentioned. So what, in fact, we designed didn't work as proposed. And so we knew this was going to be somewhat of an iterative process, working with stakeholders and folks using the corridor certainly more regularly than I or any of the other folks on the project team. Other negatives are impacts to operations, and that's why we are truly intending for this to be a pilot. We wanted to understand the outcomes based off of this project as it was being implemented. And then on the traffic analysis side, that's something that we do routinely for other projects. And usually we're not given the opportunity to pilot things. We have to base decisions based just off of modeling tools that we use. And so in this case, we did the modeling. We presented, not that everyone needs to go back and watch what I said in March, but there was information that I think was useful to stakeholders that was presented in March about each one of the intersections that was being modified, based off of that analysis, what the forecasted outcome was going to be to people driving along the corridor. And so we're working on this project. We're working on projects throughout the state, and we're using those same methods in other corridors throughout the state. And what we are trying to identify is kind of where you're above or below a certain threshold of anticipated delay by users along the corridor. And so they use a graded system, A through F, F being failing, A being passing with flying colors. But really what that backs into is more just what's the roadway users' expectations and how many seconds do they have to wait at a light on average to make a turn. And so we graded the intersections. Certainly not all of them raised, but they were all at a level that we felt comfortable with going forward with the pilot and then observing the outcomes there as well. So I think that answered the two questions that you had.
Yeah, and I'll just briefly add to that. We also have heard from other folks through emails and comments that we received through the interactive online map about folks using the center turn lane incorrectly as a travel lane and to pass folks who are driving the speed limit even along North or South Main Street. And so in tonight's presentation, we added some education around the proper use of a center turn lane, the do's and don'ts, and we'll be working with the town to help sort of broadcast that through the fall.
Thank you.
Sure. Moving to the next text question. This is a question from Will Finch. I know we've interacted and messaged a few times. So this question is, has there been any more discussion of a crosswalk at 1451 Main Street, which is where the Matera cabin is located? So right at the short street at the north end of the project area, just before you get into North Reading. That question about adding a crosswalk there.
Okay. Yes, we received the comment from Mr. Finch through the project website, and so we're in discussions with the town. We haven't yet advanced the design and feasibility of whether or not that could be installed. If we did do it, we would want to make sure that it was done safely, and certainly seems like there's merit there at investigating it. So we'll do that further and hoping to have more information on that, but don't have it tonight.
Great. I know I mentioned a moment ago that Jeffrey Everson was having some audio difficulties. It looks like he left the meeting. I hope he'll rejoin it, but he also gave his question via text. So I'll sort of substitute that in and go back on the recording, or we can follow up with him later. But he said, you cited 3 cases where a road diet reduced crashes. How many other road diet configurations caused more crashes?
None that I know of. So the 3 that I cited here in the presentation this evening were all local within Massachusetts. Sorry, these the Summer Street in Hingham was a pilot similar to what we did here in Reading, and they saw a reduction in travel speeds. But in that case, they didn't look at crashes in the Wellesley and then Boston, Newton, and Watertown examples on 135 and on Anthem Road. You saw a reduction, obviously, there in the crashes that I mentioned earlier. Those trends were similar to the trends that I cited from the Federal Highway Administration, where you saw a reduction in 19 to 47% of the crashes. So hopefully that answers Jeff's question.
Great. I want to say too, at the moment, I see a couple of folks who have raised their hand again, but I do want to make sure that we get through at least all of the text questions from folks who haven't had a chance to ask yet before we go back. So I do see you guys, and we'll get back. But Nate?
Great. So the next text question is, have you looked at the intersection with Bolton Street by the McDonald's? I've seen many close calls since the northbound lane shrunk into a single lane. It's very dangerous, especially when the train stops the traffic. When there are two lanes, it made it easier to flush the traffic through. So that's at the very northern end of the South Main Street section.
Yeah, the limit of the state highway layout in our resurfacing project just goes up to the railroad tracks and doesn't extend beyond there. But so it kind of ends where MassDOT's jurisdiction ends and then where the town's jurisdiction begins. Nate, is that just north of the tracks? Because I think that was one of the...
I think just south of the tracks.
Okay.
The McDonald's is north of the tracks, right near Ash Street. It's in the town section, north in the town gap, north of our project limits.
So there, it has come up in discussions with the town staff that the intersection there, the signalized intersection, is not part of the project limits. And certainly we're aware of all of the challenges that exist at that intersection. But that was not part of this project. But I think the question is more aimed at, like, do the two lanes maybe flushed out volumes. That is something that we are monitoring, is the queues on the northbound side that may block access to and from that side street. So certainly that's something that we're going to continue to monitor throughout this pilot. And then on the southbound side, are we able to fully flush the traffic that's in that two-lane section that's then narrowed to one in the southbound direction? So we'll continue to monitor that as part of our analysis.
Great. So the next question, why were the bike lanes removed?
The bike lanes were just in the original PowerPoint presentation. They were never actually incorporated into the design. They're just used on a typical detail, and all the changes that would need to be made would be to install a marking and a sign indicating that it's a bike lane. And so those changes can be made, but we wanted to make those based off of public input, and not just, that I'd cited the reasons for the road diet pilot, and the analysis that went into it. And all of that was based off of auto crashes. Really the secondary benefit would be to be able to add the bike lanes. And that's not to say that that's any less important. But what we wanted to analyze as part of the pilot was the changes and modifications to the vehicle operations, and then measure the outcomes based off of that. So going forward, we do have standard details that we use for implementation of bike lanes, and if that's something that the folks in Reading support, that's something certainly that we have implemented on other corridors similar to this.
Alrighty. Jeff, are there any more folks with their hands raised who haven't yet spoken?
No, I'll shoot you a chat message if that pops up. But let's keep going on text questions until.
Alrighty. So the next, we have a comment from Beverly Lawrence. I joined late, therefore not sure if you covered this, but I do appreciate the updated configuration made last week for the dedicated left turn lane onto Forest Street to match other intersections. I hope if the road diet project continues, this dedicated left turn lane should be kept. At the beginning of the project and just until last week, there was no left turn lane, and it made the situation at this busy intersection very dangerous. This intersection has had many accidents in the past. I hope this will help.
Thank you, Beverly.
So I'll move on to a next question. Are there any other training or signage that will happen about center lanes? As in my experience, they are being used as passing lanes.
We certainly want to use this project's platform to kind of amplify the messaging. We have implemented center turn lanes in other communities throughout Massachusetts. And while there's a learning curve to any changes that we make along State Highway, we certainly intend that learning curve is pretty steep, and that the ultimate goal of any change is to make sure that people are following the rules and laws that we have. So it's not intended to be for passing. I think it's something that we can certainly work with our communications staff on relaying that information. It's something that we can put on our website and then work closely with our town partners if they're able to amplify that through their social media sites or other meetings as well. But yeah, we want to ensure that people are using things the way that we intended them to use, and if not, make sure that we're addressing that either through education or modifying how we're implementing them.
I'll add to that too, from kind of my public involvement, public engagement perspective. We hope that the folks who came to this meeting tonight and have heard this information, you leave with that link, and you can, use your own networks as well to circulate it around and say, like, hey, I just learned how to use these. Here's this resource. If you have a Facebook page or something, that's always helpful as well. Sorry to interrupt, Nate.
No worries. Thank you. So next question, regarding the driveway grading, they did part 1 and we're going to finish it when they did the final repaving. I have a water vent in my driveway that sticks up about 3 inches from the driveway. Because of where that driveway is located, lots of snow ends up there, and they have someone plow. With the water line head sticking up, it will get hit repeatedly. Will someone come and fix that for the winter? So I know we also, Andy, had some conversations last week about that lip between a lot of the driveways and the rest of Main Street. If you wouldn't mind hitting both of those.
Sure. Paul, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, and that was brought up when we, just as far as the sequence of work, when the driveways and side streets get final paved is one of the last things in the project, actually. So because we're at the binder grade and we're going to continue through the winter, there is in some areas there's some either a lip or some variations in the elevations, and we've been working closely with the town, Ryan Percival in particular, from the town, to identify those locations and get them corrected before the winter. The second part, if it's a water gate or something like that, again, if the location could be passed on either through text or through an email, that is obviously something we want to address not only before the winter but right away, because it should not be sticking up for any length of time, and certainly not for the winter.
Okay.
So we have a couple of hands. I'm sorry, Andy, did you want to add anything more there?
Nope.
Right. We've had a couple of hands, and I know Ellen was also next in our text queue. So Ellen, I'll unmute you if you want to either ask that question or a different one. My voice should be good.
Thank you, Jeff. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I misunderstood the raise the hand button. Anyways, thank you. Great presentation, by the way, and thanks for having us all tonight. I know you guys are probably familiar with this request. I've sent some feedback on it in the past and have gotten some changes. However, there's still a dangerous situation, which I feel on the northbound Main Street side, turning right before the Charles Street turn. so between the firehouse and Charles Street northbound. It was on the right-hand lane dropped, and you had the hatch marks, which now I know it's called hatch marks, to eliminate that lane and for all the traffic to squeeze left to the through lane. So as part of some of the changes that you guys made, you had it erased or tried to. So it's still visible. And what's happened now, it's created a very dangerous situation. So some drivers think that the hatch mark is still valid and they observe it. So they jog left to the through lane and then go to take their right-hand turn out to Charles Street. Some drivers are not observing it because it's been quasi-erased and they continue in the hatch mark lane up on the right-hand side of cars. I live right outside, honestly, like I live right in front of it and hear the cars honking at each other constantly all day. So if there haven't been accidents already, there will be. So my question to you after this long explanation is what is the plans here? And I should say short-term plan. And is there consideration to make this a right turn lane only due to the amount of traffic that does turn onto Charles Street?
Thank you, Ellen.
So Ellen, I think you know the long term is in the spring we come back and resurface the hatching that was eradicated or removed, but is still visible to some drivers and maybe not others. Will be a kind of a clean slate once the final outcome is determined as to whether or not we'll put back the road diet pilot or put back the original conditions. We didn't think a right turn lane was warranted there, but that doesn't mean we can't go back and relook at it. We were just intending to really have that wide area where vehicles making that right turn could utilize that space where the hatch was. And then the merge would happen kind of just after that Charles Street right turn in the northbound direction. But Paul, I know we did talk about some of that on our project meeting over the last couple of weeks. Would there be a ability to do anything else on temporary service that's down now?
Yeah, I think the only thing we could certainly evaluate is whether or not there's some sort of treatment to try and mask, if you will, the eradication that's out there. The one thing that I would say is, I kind of equated to the situation that you in one of the slides, I think, Andy, and you might even, I don't know if it probably won't be visible, but down at Doyon's in Dynamic Sports, where we had a kind of a similar type of thing where we had a lot of eradication and it was a very stark contrast in the before and after. Some of that has been eradicated since by the gas work, but some of it also has just been eradicated over time as the polishing from the grinding gets worn off and the contrast starts to fade a little bit. But that certainly, we can look and talk with the contractor to see if maybe they have any recommendations for kind of a surface treatment. The fear that I have is if you trying to paint it black, so to speak, you just change the contrast from a gray to a black, and it's still there. So the challenge is trying to find something that blends in nicely and kind of recreates a blank surface, if you will.
Okay.
Great. So the next question is, I'm still unclear regarding the left turn at Avon Street after the Bagel World area. Is it intentional for a person taking a left turn onto Avon Street to be turning from the travel lane on southbound Main Street? I believe this is for drivers traveling southbound on Main Street just past Bagel World and taking a left turn.
Okay. This is sorry. Hopefully I'm not making people dizzy here. So this is southbound traffic.
It's going to be just off your screen, Andy. It's just south of Minot.
Yep.
But right now, I mean, I don't know. I can try and take a stab at this, and you can certainly jump in and correct. The way that it's marked in the field right now is that the two-way left turn lane, center left turn lane ends just south of Avon, and it starts the transition into the exclusive left turn lane for Minot Street. So purely by the way the markings are out there now, the correct way to make a left turn into Avon Street would be from the travel lane, the single travel lane headed southbound. Now, the way I kind of look at it is, and what may be applicable, Andy, is if you can find the slide that shows the changes we made at Franklin Street recently, because I think that's kind of very similar. We had almost the reverse situation there where exactly. So kind of consider is right now, Avon Street is right about where that last only is, right? We lengthened the exclusive left turn lane at Franklin. So one thing we could consider, I mean, this is one of those things maybe the team hasn't heard about, or maybe we haven't, take a look at whether it makes sense to shorten the left turn lane a little bit at Minot to create a small area for folks to be able to get out of that southbound lane to be able to make a left turn into Avon.
Okay.
And I think that is what the constituent was referring to, I believe.
Okay. Thanks, Paul.
Yep.
And Jeff, before I hand it back to you, that is officially all of the text questions we've received.
Excellent, great. So Lawrence, you're next up on our hands list, and then we'll start getting back through folks. I know Robert, Deb, and Bernard, you still have your hands up as well. So we'll get back to you. But Lawrence, you're self-muted as well as the unmute that I've just given you, so you should be good to go now.
Hello, how are you?
Doing well, how are you?
Good. Thank you for putting on this presentation. All the revisions that I've seen you guys made have definitely been an improvement. So thank you for that. Two safety concerns that I can think of, and it's in your jurisdiction, but you haven't really done anything, is the South Street. The South Street intersection is known for bad accidents. There was just one a couple months ago that was pretty bad, and it made the front page of the newspaper. Is there any thought on how to make that safer?
That's a great question. So South Street, maybe for folks who don't know, is down closer to the interchange with I-95. It's a signalized intersection with 2 lanes in each direction. It was looked at as being incorporated as part of the road diet pilot, and just because of the proximity to the interchange and the volumes that were observed at that location, that based off our analysis and the modeling that we did, it wouldn't function as well. That's not to say that some changes could not be made there. So I had mentioned earlier about the drainage issue and how, for the most part, we're keeping the existing curb width maintained throughout the corridor. And so I think in that spirit of trying to maintain the corridor, there wasn't anything that we could do as part of this resurfacing project. That's not to say, though, that something further couldn't be developed to improve safety at that intersection. We mentioned that that's a priority of ours at the DOT. And would certainly work with the town going forward on any improvements that could be made at that South Street intersection. So thank you for the comment. I think it's something that we can consider going forward.
Great. Robert Atkinson, I'll unmute you next. And again, you're also unmuted.
Hi, folks. I've contacted you a couple times in the past, so I won't belabor it, but I'm not a fan. I've seen there are 3 other state highways which have had this road diet approach. Of the 3, 2 of them didn't really work, and one of them has. 114 between River Road in Middleton and Route 1 in Danvers. That actually needs 2 extra lanes. Certainly this section I'm not happy with. I've noticed couple of potential accidents. In one case, I saw a driver on the left-hand side of the double yellow at an intersection. I sent an email about it on 29 May. Also, I've published a letter to the editor in the North Reading Transcript. My biggest concern is with traffic volumes increasing and you're taking away flow capacity. You're claiming that reduced speeds reduce accidents. At the limit, if you reduce speed to 0, there'll be no accidents, but nobody will be able to get anywhere. How are we going to increase with increasing traffic, particularly when you guys quoted a traffic volume of 19,000 vehicles per day in that stretch? What's going to happen 10 or 20 years from now when that's 20, 25, 30,000 vehicles a day? In an ideal world, I'd like to see it as a 5-lane center turn with 2 lanes in each direction, but that would be prohibitively expensive and require land taking. So that's not going to happen. But taking away capacity as traffic is increasing seems counterintuitive to me. And it's going to back up into North Reading and Stone when you drop the lane, just like it backs up on 93 or 93 in Wilmington on the northbound lane drop, or 128 north when you lose a lane at Route 28, going from 4 lanes to 4 lanes each direction to 3 lanes into Linfield and Peabody. Thanks,
Sure.
guys.
Sure. What I will say is this is, I mentioned a couple times that this is a curb-to-curb state of good repair resurfacing project. It's not a full corridor implementation. And just as quickly as we implement these projects, we kind of are circling back, 10 or 15 years later to do the same state of good repair maintenance activities along the corridor. So this isn't a 20, 30-year solution. This is, really getting us through to the next time that we plan on resurfacing, or if there's another project along this corridor that's identified for implementation. There was a question earlier in the evening about the transition into North Reading, and I mentioned there how, in fact, we didn't change the capacity of the corridor at the northern limit, that there was a through lane that transitioned into a left-only lane that had existed for a number of years. And so that kind of limiting capacity on the northern end of the project limits was in fact identical to what's out there today. So really our process from there drilled down to an intersection by intersection analysis, and that information and the analysis that we did was presented previously in March, but showed that in fact there wasn't going to be a catastrophic outcome and that there was potential to pilot it. So we were going to continue to pilot it, measure it against the volume. We don't want to make a long-term decision based off of a pandemic, so we extended it obviously through the summer and into the winter, and we plan to continue to analyze the impacts along the corridor as well. And then the other projects that you identified, Paul, I don't know if you know of any of the ones that you referenced in your district, but for the most part, the analysis that we've collected, that the folks seem to, the outcomes show rather that the safety of the corridor is significantly improved when it comes to reducing severe injury crashes, as well as just crashes overall.
Alrighty, we did get a question that came in over email to the project email address, so I'll just hop over to that quickly. And this was someone who was listening to the meeting. So my one question and remaining frustration is, how does one pass someone going 27 miles per hour, significantly lower than the speed limit, all the way through town? I've spoken with people who have been passed in center turn lane, which I would expect is dangerous and counterproductive to the intent of the road diet.
Sorry, Nate, I missed the first part of the question. Can you repeat it?
Sure. And that is, how does one pass someone going 27 miles per hour or any speed significantly lower than the speed limit all the way through town?
You are not allowed to pass in the proposed corridor, except for in areas where there are 2 lanes in one direction or the other. So there's no passing allowed on the corridor.
Great. I see. Sorry, I'm just sorting through the list here. Deb, I see you raised your hand again, and as well as Bernard, and then we have another text question from Maureen. So Deb, I'll unmute you for another 2 minutes here. You're still self-muted though, by the way.
Okay.
Nope, you're
All right,
good now.
Okay.
Nope, we good now.
Andy just, said it. He said it also when I raised my other concerns that, oh, there's no passing. Motorists are supposed to pull to the right when the emergency vehicles come along. They're not supposed to stop in the left turn lane. And we all know that's not reality. And the reality of the way people are is no more evident than at Bagel World, where the people stop in the right lane because they can't get in the parking lot. I've gone down there and the cars have been 6 deep, stopped. And, there's been revisions made to the road there, which seem to encourage people to stop because that right-hand breakdown lane, whatever you want to call it, was widened a little bit. So I'm wondering what was the purpose of that, but also there's signage there that says don't stop. There's been frequent police taking notice and going down there and, telling people you can't stop here. So what measures are you going to take to educate the public that will be more successful than what's being done with Bagel World and is, not successful?
Sure, and I think there were certainly some acute instances with the Bagel World that we observed at drive-through facilities throughout the Commonwealth at the beginning of the pandemic, where drive-through facilities were still open and people were utilizing those more. So we did make some changes to help alleviate some of the issues that were occurring there at Bagel World. But certainly we're not, we're aware of those. We made obviously the left turn lane into the site. We widened the shoulder there for the right turn lane into the site. But where the site begins and our state highway layout unfortunately ends is where we have jurisdiction, and we can't influence the internal operations of the site. There were times where we observed Bagel World having vehicles queue up side by side as they went through the drive-through window, and then narrow down to one lane. And based off our observations, that slight change to their internal site operations were very beneficial. And with all abutters to State Highway, we encouraged them to work with us on coming up with solutions. That was certainly one of them. But there's also times when they're not doing that. I think in other locations we're not looking for police intervention to be the solution to maintaining access to and from businesses along our state highway. So certainly an engineering solution and a practical solution is something that we're looking for at that location. But people aren't supposed to be parking on state highway. They're not supposed to be parking in a shoulder. They're not supposed to be parking in the center turn lane. And those are all things that I mentioned earlier, the calls that were coming in through 911 dispatch. We don't want that to be the solution where people have to call 911 because of how vehicles are operating on our state highway. And so we're going to continue to partner with with the local police and fire in the town of Reading through our normal engagement meetings that we've been having with them to come up with solutions to address the safety issues along the corridor.
Great. We have 2 questions that came in from Maureen Hurley. The first question is, road diets were cited in Hingham, Wellesley, and Nonantum Road. Are these 3 roads actually comparable to this road diet in terms of volumes of traffic, houses, and businesses that line the corridor? So that's the first question. And then the second is, if traffic in schools don't resume to normal prior to the date set for finalization, is there a possibility of that date being extended so that we can get a true gauge of how this road diet actually works? I specifically think of when kids are being driven and picked up from school, and when there's an accident on a traffic pack 93 or 95, where Route 28 always catches the spill-off traffic.
Okay. So I'll answer the second question first. if we are in the midst of a spike in COVID cases, the Reading school system decides that they need to go all remote for some reason, we might not have an effective analysis of this outcome. And I think that's where we're continuing to engage with the municipal staff, as well as continued public outreach, whether it's virtually in this platform or through other means, to get feedback on what we're observing. And so we'll continue to do those field observations. I had mentioned the traffic data that we're collecting throughout the state, where we're measuring a % change compared to 2019. And so we're looking to get at or close to 100% of the volume. And in some parts of the Commonwealth, we are seeing that today, that traffic is returning to near 2019 levels. We're not seeing that in Reading, and I'm not stating that we are, but we're going to base our decision off of that data. Is the data showing that we're close or at or near what those thresholds are? And then use the analysis that we conducted previous to implementing this pilot to see what would a sensitivity analysis show a return to volume of at or near 110% of what 2019 levels were. So there's different ways that we can look at this information. We're not going to base it off of what we saw this past summer. We're not going to even base it off of what we saw in September. We want to have more time and see somewhat of a more return to what the levels were in 2019. Assess that information, then make a decision going forward. The other corridors that I identified, Newton and Wellesley, in South Boston and Hingham, are obviously different contexts that you see here. Then there's other road diet implementations that we've done in the Commonwealth that are similar to this context. I think what it boils down to is really the analysis that we did at the intersections is really where, from an operational perspective, we're going to learn whether or not the road diet works. Along the corridor, you're have a more traditional cross section where if you have one lane and a turn lane, are people able to use the turn lane to get into an adjacent driveway, whether it be a business or residential? Is the shoulder being utilized? Kind of a lot of the other aspects that came up this evening. It really, though, boils down to the intersections, and if those are going to work, then we think that the pilot has the ability to be implemented long term. So we'll continue to circle back to that, certainly throughout Massachusetts, but then throughout the country, we've seen road diets that have been implemented in very similar context to what you see in Reading. In fact, it kind of lends itself to the type of corridor that you see in Reading, both north and south of the downtown area, where there are closely spaced driveways, where otherwise you're making a left turn from a through lane along a corridor that then requires the vehicle behind you to make a lane change to go around you as you're waiting to make that left turn, and you're making that left turn across multiple lanes of traffic. Here in Reading, where you remove the turning vehicles from those through lanes, it allows for that to happen more safely and more efficiently along the corridor. I think that answered the two questions.
So I just want to be conscious that we're past 8 o'clock now. It's 8:10. I know we sort of promised a 7:30 stop time. So if there are any folks who are hanging with us who are kind of like, all right, I'm ready to go eat dinner or watch the debate or anything, I just wanted to stress one more point from the engagement perspective, building off of what Andy just said, is we are in a lot of ways kind of beginning our analysis now, right? So we're hoping that all of you will continue to engage with us through the project email, through that online interactive map, and tell us over the course of the rest of the fall and into the winter what your experiences on the roadway are going forward, right? As it sort of stops becoming so much of a construction zone and approaches more of a sense of normalcy. So I just wanted to re-highlight the website that's on here, mass.gov, the long email, the really long URL. So maybe just Google it for Route 28 Road Diet Pilot, the project email, and again, that voicemail, which we have set up for tonight for anyone who's been watching on our CTV and wants to leave us some kind of verbal comment as well. So I just wanted to make sure I got to that point. Then I know we still have at least one more text question from Lawrence, and Bernard's hand is still raised. So I think that after those two might be a good stopping point for the evening, unless anything else comes up in that moment. But
and I will say, Jeff, just maybe before maybe some people log off, that this process and the outcome will be better based off the input that you all give to us. To date, I think we've shown that we are willing and able to make changes. I think maybe more so than any project I've ever worked on, where we're engaging on a weekly basis, the local municipality, and then making adjustments, not in real time, but maybe only lagging like a week or two based off of the feedback that we get from you all. And in my opinion, that is making the product, the end decision, both more informed and better for the folks of Reading, and I think for the folks throughout the state. So.
Great. So I also just saw that Vanessa Alvarado has raised her hand from the select board, so I want to make sure we give you a chance to speak as well. So Vanessa, I'll start with you since you haven't had a chance to speak yet, and then we'll go to Lawrence and Bernard again. Oh, sorry, you just unraised your hand. Same if you're all right. Bernard, let's start with you for another 2 minutes, and then we'll wrap up with Lawrence. Or if you're okay.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, folks. Just on the cycling question, bicycle lanes, I do ride my bike rather regularly from Reading to Boston, to work. It's a 32 miles round trip. And I will say that 28 is not the road to be putting a bike lane on, especially given the confusion and complexity that has been created by this traffic choking strategy. So I guess that would be my thing. If you do want to do that, then the best way to put bike traffic on is take part of the sidewalk and route the bike traffic off of the road behind a curb. And that would be my comment there. I guess the other question is, how could Reading take back or take control or ownership of this section of road so that we can avoid having to deal with these impositions from the state? And the second, and the last comment I'd make is that how do we evaluate, and what is the end point that we can evaluate? In other words, could we agree that if the total volume and speed is not improved by this traffic choking strategy, then we would therefore determine that the old pattern was better and we should go back to it? Can we agree that that is subject to the accident rate per volume of traffic, not just the absolute number of accidents? So how could we have an agreement on that? Is that how we would determine whether this was a success or not? Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely, Bernard. I would agree entirely with that last point. The volume and speed, if we see certainly those measures, as well as other measures that I had mentioned earlier, observations and feedback that we're getting from the public. If kind of all of those are not hitting any of the marks that we anticipated, certainly that's why we're doing this pilot. I will say I don't think there's just going to be a black or white outcome here. Like, I don't think it's going to be yes or no, a binary solution. I think as we've shown based off of some of the changes that we've made along the corridor, there might be solutions that work in some portions of the corridor and maybe not others, but to be determined. I don't think that's an end solution at all. We have done discontinuance, and maybe I'll punt that one to you, Paul, and but in the meantime, I'll answer or you had mentioned that separated bike facilities or something raised and separated. And I would agree with you that's what we would want to do if we were trying to encourage folks to bike along the corridor. I mentioned earlier that the shoulders themselves are not what we would consider a suitable for a large percentage of the population to bike in. That you're only going to find what are described as strong and fearless cyclists using a shoulder that's on a multi-lane roadway of this speed and this volume. Really, what the shoulders are supposed to be for is for allow for at least some space for a vehicle to pull over, mail delivery to occur, drainage in the edge of the roadway, create some space or separation from someone traveling in the lane and the curb itself, and then create some separation from where people are walking on the sidewalk and the vehicles as they're passing you while you're walking. But the imposition, as far as ownership of the facility, Paul, I don't know if you wanted to touch on that at all.
Not too much, Andy. I mean, as you said, there are occasions where we've done discontinuances of state highway. It's typically generated by a request from the elected officials in the community. Have not received anything similar to that in this case or prior to this. So I really don't have anything much concrete to offer on that particular thing. There's certainly a process to do it, but we have not been approached by the town of Reading to consider that.
Cool. Great. The last question we have that came over text is from Lawrence. And Lawrence, I'm actually going to unmute you. And if you prefer to ask this question over audio, feel free. Andy, I think it'd be helpful for this if we could go back to the revised pavement markings at Minot Street.
Hello.
Are you on, Lawrence?
Yes, I am.
All right.
So the question I had texted in pretty much was Bagel World. You guys gave them the little bit of a shoulder, but with them cars backing out going northbound into Bagel World, and then the cars coming southbound in the turn only lane going left, trying to get by there at 30 miles an hour is a pretty hairy. I know it is against the law to stop there, and you guys put a little tiny sign up further north that says no parking on a state highway, but maybe there needs to be some cross marks in that lane and some more signage that says it's illegal to stop on a highway.
Okay. Certainly, we welcome that input and are aware of the situation you're describing where you're passing a vehicle that's pulled over in the shoulder adjacent to you, and then as you pass that vehicle, there's another queue of vehicles in the left lane facing you. And so the revisions that we made were intended to address some of those issues, but that situation that you're describing can occur. And so, yeah, certainly willing to and are open to discussions about how to improve that occurrence there. I will say there's no, it doesn't seem like there's any one perfect solution there. It is a thriving business, and we certainly don't want to close off a business, certainly not during the middle of a pandemic where people are trying to get food. And so I'm hoping that we're in working through the town and listening to the feedback from you all that we're able to improve the safety as well as the access to and from the businesses, not just here at Bagel World. This was one example. I mentioned the Dions and the Dynamic Sports location too. That's where we tried to make some improvements there. But throughout the corridor, there's other locations where we've made modifications based off of access points along the corridor. And we do what we thought was a beneficial end. So looking to continue to do that.
Great. One of the things I just wanted to say before we wrap up is, thank you all for sharing your ideas and thoughts, suggestions, and questions. I think we heard some great ideas and suggestions tonight that we're gonna, take back and think about. And we've been making changes as we go, and we'll continue working with the town and coordinating on how to do this project better and get the word out. And we did have lots of ideas for in-person engagement at the beginning of this project. Partnering with the town to go to Truck Day and the Fall Fair. So we have had to pivot a bit. And if folks have suggestions for how we can better educate people on how to use the center turn lanes, or better explain this project, feel free to email the project email address. We're looking for ways to do this better. So with that, I just want to acknowledge and recognize Vanessa Alvarado from the Select Board. Vanessa, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I first want to give my thanks, and then I have 3 short observations. First, I want to give my thanks to everyone on the DOT staff who has worked on this project so collaboratively with the town and adapting the feedback sessions to the COVID conditions. As I've driven on the road, I've seen the improvements that you've made, and I know those are a result of the feedback that residents have given you. So thank you for being responsive to that. I also want to thank Senator Lewis and Representatives Haggerty and Jones for their involvement in this process as well. I'll start with the most important issue as I see it that I've heard here tonight and as well as elsewhere, and that's the public safety vehicle access. This has been an issue that was raised by Chief Clark, and I'm curious, not necessarily to answer now because the night has gone late, but how other towns have managed this issue given the same conditions. And if there's information that you can share with our chiefs on how to address their concerns, I think that would be appreciated. The other issue is the bike lanes. I've heard from residents that are very interested in having designated bike lanes in town. Although I do agree with the previous speaker that there is a bit of a safety concern there, just given the nature of the traffic. So anything we can do to both have bike lanes and address some of those safety concerns, I think would be well received, especially given the increase in the population downtown due to some large developments that we have there. And the last comment I have is regarding the Bolton Street intersection. That's where the McDonald's is. Someone had mentioned it earlier. I understand that's outside the scope of this project, but it seems a good time to perhaps evaluate that, working with the town to see if there's any improvements we can make to that area while this area is under construction. So again, my thanks to everyone involved and to all the residents who have provided feedback. It's really made the project safer and more driver friendly. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Vanessa, and we can certainly work with other municipalities as well as our public safety partners at the state level, the state police, on how we have implemented and addressed issues with emergency access along corridors with similar cross sections, and willing and able to work with the town hand in hand on biking along the corridor and bike safety. Going forward on this project. And then Bolton Street certainly is a challenging one with the railroad tracks, the access to and from the businesses, and the proximity to the next the signalized intersection just north of there. And I know the town, and speaking with the town engineering staff, they've certainly it's on their radar as well. And through our partnership with the municipality, are willing and able to work with them on any solutions that we could do as part of this project and the work that we're doing now, but also going forward, we work with municipalities throughout the state on identifying transportation projects that are funded through the region and are very similar to the one that you see here in Reading. So thank you for your input, feedback, and support throughout this process.
Great, Andy, I think that is it. If you want to just head back to the contact info slide. Just remind folks, we'll be monitoring the project email and taking new comments that come in from the interactive map, as well as we set up a voicemail. So if you were listening in or seeing this on RCTV, feel free to call that number and leave a voicemail, and we'll be checking those as well.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone who attended, Nate, and certainly Nate and Jeff have been a tremendous partner in this new COVID outreach experience. So thank you to them for their support and you all for participating in this virtual format. Certainly learning as we go, but getting better as we do, I'd like to think anyways. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, folks. Have a good night.